I'm Carson Horn, and it's time for another edition of Talkin' Tumors, where I break down the latest happenings in Auburn athletics. Let's get rolling. How many of you have heard, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. I think I've heard it before. I think many of you have probably heard it before as well. And maybe, just maybe, Hugh Freeze needs to hear that from some people in his life. We'll discuss that today on today's show. This is our first episode of Talkin' Tumors since I graduated from Auburn University. I am now an alum of Auburn University, excited to be able to say that and excited to be able to get back in studio and to record Talkin' Tumors. I told you not much was going to change with this show, and I wasn't lying to you. Not much is going to change. All that has changed is I'm no longer a student. I'm a recent alum, but I'm working for the university, and therefore I'm still able to continue to record this show, and I'm super excited about that. I'm going to continue to try to bring the best content I can for you all, and I really look forward to this summer, getting to record some episodes, and then, of course, rolling on to the fall as things really start to pick up. But we have plenty of news pertaining to Auburn to get into on today's show. We have Hugh Freeze's comments that stirred up some controversy last week that I was referencing to. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. I'm going to discuss that very shortly here on this show. I also have a couple of topics to discuss regarding Auburn's basketball. Tahaad Pettiford, what's he going to do? Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? I have a potential breakout candidates for Auburn football this season that we'll look at. Some post-spring roster concerns. Also going to start up a segment that was really popular last season, dealing with the summer preview of future Auburn opponents. We'll start with Baylor today, as that is Auburn's first game, and then we'll move forward in the coming weeks into other opponents, and we will start to take a look at Auburn baseball, Auburn softball, as well in our sports roundup at the end, and a couple other fun topics. So, suffice to say, we have plenty to dive into today on today's show. Really looking forward to it. If you're watching on YouTube, really appreciate it. If you're listening on podcast, thank you for listening there as well. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the show. It means a lot. Again, thank you so much for continuing to listen to Talkin' Tumors. And with that being said, let's dive in now to Hugh Freeze and the comment he made this past week on the next round. He was at the Regions Pro-Am, I believe it was. He was making his rounds, talking to media, and he had a quote that stirred up some controversy on social media, on the message boards. I tweeted about it when it happened, and I said, look, I'm going to wait till Monday to address it. I believe it was on Thursday or Friday when this clip was making its round. So, if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me read you the quote, and then I will dive into the fallout from it. So here's the quote from Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze, the question he was asked was, did he believe there was a certain amount, X amount of wins that he needed to have next season to keep his job? This was his response. Quote, I'm not a fool. I think we've got to go to a bowl game, and I think our administration understands. Look, I inherited a program that didn't have a top 25 recruiting class for 4 years. You're not going to win in this league. We've had 2 full recruiting classes, both top 10. I think one more year, then your roster looks complete. But I'm still not naive, and we should have won some games last year, that we could have won some games. I shouldn't say we should. We could have won some games last year, and we've got to find a way to make sure we're excellent in those areas that cost us, those that put us in a position to at least be bowl eligible, if not more. And I see no reason why we shouldn't do that. And I think that's an expectation that our people should expect. So that quote really caused some controversy on social media. There were 2 responses to it. The first response was actually more people than I thought had this response, including multiple of my friends when I asked them about it, was, what's wrong with that answer? Hugh Freeze there's nothing wrong with that. He answered the question. He's right. Auburn needs to be bowl eligible next season. If they're not, he's likely going to be out of a job. There's no issue with that answer. That was one reaction. The other reaction was he doesn't get it. What is Hugh Freeze saying? That is a terrible, terrible answer. He's going to be gone before the season ends. He's the worst coach ever. You get my drift there. So either a complete meltdown or people being confused as to as to why the answer was stirring up any controversy, period. And that's how it goes for most every topic. You're going to have completely different takes on one clip. Sometimes it goes because people don't actually watch the clip and they only look at the quote in the tweet. Sometimes people just hear what they want to hear. And sometimes people just completely differ on the situation, even given the context. So you know what I always try to do on this show when there's a controversial topic. I try to present you the context. I try to present you both sides of the argument. And then I try to lay out where I fall on it. So I just gave you the two sides. So where do I fall on this issue? For me, I agree. What he said wasn't wrong. It wasn't inaccurate. But it also was not the best answer. There's a difference between being right and being wrong and then just giving the best answer possible. Let me give you an analogy to kind of how I relate to it. So I just mentioned I just recently graduated. So let's say, for instance, a year ago, someone asked me, hey, Carson, what do you need to do to graduate? And I looked at him and said, well, I need not to fail my classes, so I need to make, I guess, at least a C in every class I take. If I do that, I'll graduate. I know that it's not necessarily on the same level, but that's the closest of an analogy as I could think of. Or maybe you're thinking of, you're in the working world and say, what do I need to not do to not get fired in the working world? And you think of, okay, well, I've got to do the bare minimum, whatever the bare minimum is. That's the way the answer was received. I'm not necessarily arguing that was the intention of Hugh Freeze. I spent, I don't know how many segments and how much time throughout these last 2 years on this show defending Hugh Freeze and defending some of his post-game press conference answers. The reason is because I always said he's honest. Should he say some of the things he says? No. But he's not lying in his answers. And he wasn't lying here. He was being honest. He knows I've got to at least make a bowl game or I'm going to get fired. And that is true. That's what everyone talking about Hugh Freeze's job security this upcoming season is saying those things. But when you're the head coach, is that the best answer to give? Even as you're asked an X amount of wins, is that the best answer to give? In my argument, I think many who fall on the side of having an issue with Hugh Freeze's comments are, no, that is not the answer that Auburn fans want to hear. Those who are frustrated by this response, they're tired of the same old, same old. You heard Hugh Freeze in there mention the roster, and he's mentioned that ad nauseum. He's not wrong. Now, he did say something that was inaccurate that some people have pointed out. Auburn did not have 4 straight recruiting classes outside the top 25. That was just false. But no one is pushing back on Hugh Freeze's argument. At least no one I saw is pushing back on Hugh Freeze's point that the roster was in bad shape. No one's arguing that. We all knew that. We've talked about that. We've discussed that. Every Auburn fan would admit that. People understood the situation that Hugh Freeze was walking into when he became the coach at Auburn. Hugh Freeze understood what he was walking into when he became the head coach at Auburn. So I'm not going to push back too hard on that, although that was an inaccurate statement. But people are tired of hearing it. They're tired of hearing about the talent, the roster not being good enough, not being where it needs to be. That didn't excuse losses to Cal or losses to Arkansas or even Oklahoma last year. There's been plenty of games that Auburn and Hugh Freeze lost to New Mexico State 2 years ago that Auburn had the better roster and still lost. So that doesn't excuse those games. Yes, games against Alabama. Yes, games against Georgia and some others in the SEC. Okay, fair point. Auburn had the lesser roster in those games, but people are tired of hearing it. So when you immediately, many Auburn fans, when they heard Hugh Freeze dive into the roster and the talent level and saying, well, really, I need one more class, people are like, are you serious? Are you kidding me right now? We're already throwing out excuses, even if they are true. Even if you do believe that Auburn's still one class away from being on the same level talent-wise with the best of the best in college football. Even if you do believe that. And that's the argument, debate that we can have. Not going to have it today. But that's an argument we can have. Even if you believe that, you're probably still tired of hearing it. Like, we haven't even started the season. You're already starting with this? Like, come on. That was the reaction. Fair or not. Again, I'm just laying that out. But I did have issue with the comments. But it's not fair for me to just say I didn't like the comments. I think I hate when people say, well, I hate that. Well, okay, then what would you say differently? How would you have handled that question? If I was in Hugh Freeze's shoes, how would I have answered that question? I think it's important if I'm going to be behind this microphone, not just to criticize, but answer, well, okay, how would you do it better? How would you answer that question better? If I was in Hugh Freeze's shoes, and he is certainly way more qualified than I am in, and I do not envy his position whatsoever, But if I were in Hugh Freeze's shoes, the answer I would have given would have had something to do with, we haven't delivered the results we've wanted to the last several years. We know we've underachieved. Our fans deserve better. We appreciate them sticking with us. We expect to compete in each and every game this year in the SEC. We expect to compete with the best of the best in the SEC. You don't need to give a certain win total. You don't need to worry about that if you're Hugh Freeze. You focus on one game at a time. You focus on being the best you can be and understanding that what you've done the last 2 years isn't acceptable. It's not good enough at Auburn. You should be better. So something to that effect would have been a better answer than Hugh Freeze saying, we've at least got to go bowl eligible. That should be the expectation, if not more. No, the expectation in Auburn should be to compete for championships, to compete for the SEC, to beat your rivals. This is not going to happen every year, but you should be competing and beating Georgia and Alabama on a fairly consistent basis. I understand they've been the standard of college football, but Auburn has proven time and time and again it can compete and beat the best in the sport. Those are the expectations, and in year 3, those should be the expectations. Year 1, okay. Year 2, you get a little bit of pass, but you lost 7 games last year. You went 5-7. That's inexcusable at any point at Auburn. You won 6 games, and you went backwards and won 5. So the expectation should be greater than, hey, let's just make a bowl game next season. That was my issue. It was not an inspiring quote from Hugh Freeze. Even if he was answering the question honestly, it wasn't the best answer for you to give, and that's why I brought up the analogy with passing. If I were to answer that question about what do I need to do to pass my classes and graduate a year ago, and I said that, whoever I gave that answer to was like, whew, well, that's not very inspiring. That's not going to give me confidence that he's actually going to graduate if that's all he's looking to do, if that's the only expectations he put on himself. And again, I try to be fair. I do, but Hugh Freeze needs to be better there. And we know PR isn't his strong suit. Again, I go back to all the segments that we've had the last 2 years addressing his comments, and I have defended him. So I'm not just piling on to Hugh Freeze. I've defended his answers in the past because I do believe he is honest, and he is honest to a fault sometimes in press conferences where he really probably should give more coach speak, and I appreciated his honesty. But here was a situation where he could have been honest while also bringing a little bit more optimism and not already throwing in some reasons or excuses, if you will, for where the program is and why the program might not win a certain amount of games or not. And that's my 2 cents on it. Again, it was pretty divided from what I could tell on Auburn Twitter on this issue. But that's where I stand on it. Again, feel free to disagree. I know many of you probably do. But to summarize, was his answer wrong? No. But was it the best possible answer to give? Could he have certainly given a better answer? Yes. And should he have, in my eyes, yes. Okay. With that being said, let's transition now to news surrounding Auburn basketball. Maybe that gets you in a happier mindset. Maybe the memories of the Auburn basketball season make you happier. So let's talk about what could this roster look like next season. We think Auburn's just about done in the transfer portal with roster additions, but there's a big piece still laying out there, the puzzle that Auburn is still missing, and that is Tahaad Pettiford. What is he going to do? Last week was the NBA Combine, and Tahaad Pettiford had a great combine. He performed really well. We knew he was a great athlete. He came in at over 6 feet tall, which, to be quite honest with you, surprised me. I figured he would come in at a little under 6 feet. Him coming in at 6 feet tall was a big deal. He is still undersized for the NBA, yes, but he can play at that height. In the NBA. It has been done before. It can be done, especially with his athleticism. He was one of the most athletic players there. And in his first scrimmage last Wednesday, he scored over 23 points, I think over 8 assists. I think he made 5 threes. He was exceptional. The second scrimmage, not so good. He did not play nearly as well in that one. But overall, he had a really strong NBA combine. So what does this mean for Auburn? Well, I'm checking my phone now as we are at 1. I'm recording this a little after 1 on Monday afternoon. Bruce Pearl is speaking to the media today. He's been going through that here the last several minutes at his, I believe it's Children's Harbor fundraiser, I believe. Something to that effect. He's speaking to the media there. I haven't seen a new update on Tahaad Pettiford, but the last I saw was Bruce Pearl last week at Jimmy Raines Foundation dinner, I believe it was. And Bruce Pearl said that Tahaad Pettiford, if he got a first-round grade, he was going to the NBA. If not, he will return to Auburn. That has been the expectation now since Tahaad Pettiford declared for the NBA draft, and is still the expectation. The question remains, is Tahaad Pettiford going to get that guarantee? If he does, he's going to go to the NBA. That would be fantastic for Tahaad Pettiford. It'd be fantastic for Auburn basketball. What it would not be fantastic for is Auburn basketball next season. It would throw a big wrench into Auburn basketball's plans for next season, as I believe this team has really been built around Tahaad Pettiford. I think the way the roster's been constructed by Bruce Pearl and his staff is to really play to Tahaad Pettiford's strengths next season, and for him to be the guy. He will be the only returning player if he does return for Auburn next season. Completely new roster around him. So if he does go, hopefully we'll know by the time you're listening to the podcast, maybe we do know an answer. But if Tahaad Pettiford were to go, this does change my outlook for Auburn next season. Bruce Pearl also said that he has been in contact with multiple players. If Tahaad Pettiford does go, that Auburn will bring in one of those guys to be the point guard next season. And I'm sure all those players are good players. They're not going to be Tahaad Pettiford. So no matter who Auburn brings in, I'm sure it'll be a good player. You can't have the same expectations for this Auburn basketball team. I already think we need to be careful with the expectations we set, because this is a brand new team, and it's going to take some time for this team to gel, for this team to come together. But also, if you lose a great player like Tahaad Pettiford, that's going to hurt your team no matter who you bring in. So, if you're thinking this team, okay, has a chance to compete in the SEC, which I still believe without Tahaad Pettiford, Auburn will, but you're looking at a team that you think maybe is going to be a 3 or 4 seed next season. I haven't really come up with my idea yet of where I think Auburn will land, but you take Tahaad Pettiford out, I think you've got to start looking at a team that going to drop down a few seed lines. If you thought they would be a 3 or 4 seed, maybe you're looking at a 5 or 6 seed, or 7 or 8 seed even. It's just so hard to predict, and I'm not even going to attempt to predict where this Auburn basketball team is going to be next season. I think Auburn's coaches have done a fantastic job of bringing in talent, bringing in really good players. But there's a ton of unknown, and there will be even more unknown if Tahaad Pettiford does not return to Auburn. So just have to keep an eye on that and be careful with how you set your expectations for next season. I know we have a long way to go. We are only in May. Season won't even start until end of November, December. Long way to go here, but just wanted to add a few thoughts on that. As far as other news surrounding Auburn basketball, Bruce Pearl did comment today that Auburn is close to landing an international prospect to be the final piece of the roster. He hopes, assuming Tahaad Pettiford returns, Auburn needed to add another piece in the front court. Remember, Auburn's already added Keyshawn Murphy from Mississippi State as a transfer big. Auburn has added Keyshawn Hall, who can play the 4. Auburn brings in Sebastian Williams-Adams, who can play the 3 and the 4. Emeka Oporum, I believe if I'm pronouncing his name right, is also a transfer center from JUCO. So Auburn has some pieces in the front court, but really needed another guy. We'll see who this international prospect ends up being. If Auburn is able to land him, we'll talk more about that when it does occur, if and when it does occur on the show. And then finally, to wrap up the basketball news, assistant coach Chad Pruitt announced he will be leaving Auburn basketball coaching staff to pursue a call to ministry. He has been an assistant with Bruce Pearl, I believe, since the beginning, and he's done a fantastic job as far as I can tell. Seems like a really good dude, and wish him nothing but the best as he feels a calling to ministry. Certainly applaud him for taking that on, and I wish him nothing but the best. I don't know how Bruce Pearl will fill that role, and that remains to be seen. I don't know if he'll promote from within or look to hire outside. We'll find out an answer on that, I'm sure, in the near future. Okay, let's continue rolling now, shifting back to football. This is one of my favorite segments that probably we do on this show, and I really enjoyed doing it last summer, and so I was looking forward to bringing it back this summer, and that is the summer preview of Auburn opponents. The reason I enjoy doing this segment is, one, I love college football in general, so the more I get to study other teams, I really enjoy looking at their expectations, looking at their rosters, getting a feel for their fan bases and the expectations they have. And then I just enjoy going ahead and start looking forward to possible matchups and games for Auburn this season. It's fun to do. It gets you excited for the football season. So we're starting with Auburn's first game of the year, which is at Baylor. Remember, this game got moved to a Friday night kickoff on week 1. That'll be a different type of thing that Auburn really hasn't done since I believe Auburn played on Thursday night when I was a kid at Kansas State. That's the last weeknight game I remember Auburn playing, if my memory serves correct there. But on to Baylor here. So who is Baylor? Baylor is led by head coach Dave Aranda. He is entering his 6th season at Baylor. He is 31-30 overall. He's been really good. Baylor has won the Big 12 under Dave Aranda, and he's been really bad. It's been hot or cold, really, for his tenure at Baylor. That's why it's just a game above 500 over his 5 seasons so far at the helm. But last year was a really good year. Dave Aranda entered the season on the hot seat because he was coming off a 3-9 year. They held on to him. Baylor ended up going 8-4 last year. Was a really good team. They were 81st in total defense and 19th in total offense. Remember, Dave Aranda was former defense coordinator at LSU. It's a great defensive mind, but their offense last year, that was what was so lethal. They scored 34 points per game. And they have a really, really good quarterback in Sawyer Robertson that I'll talk about in just a minute. Recruiting overall, just to give you a picture of where they stand talent-wise. They were 37th in high school recruiting last season. That was good, though, for 3rd in the Big 12. Again, it just shows you didn't pay attention to recruiting. How the 3rd team in the SEC or Big 10, I promise you, is not going to be 37th in recruiting in their own conference, but SEC and Big 10, for the most part, dominate recruiting, high school recruiting. So Baylor is 37th overall, but 3rd in the Big 12. They brought in 15 transfers this year out of the portal, but the key for them are their returners. Their quarterback, Sawyer Robertson, as I just mentioned, is phenomenal. This was a guy that I wondered if he would enter the portal this past cycle. If he did, I was going to assume that Auburn would certainly have interest in him. Very, very talented quarterback. He threw for over 3,000 yards last year, 28 touchdowns. He had 230 rush yards for 4 touchdowns. He is mobile, not the super athletic, but athletic enough. He had an 82.9 QBR last season, which was 7th best in the country. I loved watching him. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks in college football. I'm super high on Sawyer Robertson. So this is going to be a tough matchup when Auburn has to face off against him. At running back, they returned their star running back, Bryson Washington. He rushed for over 1,000 yards last season, 12 touchdowns, averaged 5.9 yards per rush. They also returned 4 out of 5 of their starting offensive linemen are seniors. They have 1 junior, so a veteran offensive line with plenty of experience. That's a huge benefit for an offense that was already really good last year. To have so many returning pieces, to have so many veteran pieces, really big for this Baylor team. At wide receiver, they did lose one. So when I did this preview, Ashton Hawkins had gotten approval for an extra year, one of their receivers. He now no longer has that, so he is out of eligibility. He gets bumped out of the rotation. He was one of their 2 leading receivers from last season, but they do return the other leading receiver in Josh Cameron. And then they added Alabama transfer Kobe Prentice. So they still have some talent at wide receiver there, but losing Ashton Hawkins for them is a big loss. On the defensive side, this Baylor team lost their top 2 leading tacklers. So there are more questions defensively for Baylor than there are offensively. They're already probably a little bit worse than typical for a Dave Aranda defense last year, but they weren't bad by any stretch of the imagination. They do have multiple transfers that have been brought in and are projected starters for them on the defensive side, but certainly more question marks there and a lot to figure out that we'll begin to figure out in this Week 1 matchup when Auburn takes on Baylor. Overall, though, they are an extremely veteran team. 14 out of their 22 projected starters are seniors. 8 out of 11 of their projected starters on offense are seniors. So this is a team that won last year, had a lot of success, finished 8-4, as I mentioned, lost to LSU in the bowl game, so I think finished 8-5, but 8-4 regular season. They're returning their star quarterback, returning their really good running back, and expecting to compete and have a chance to win the Big 12 this season. I certainly believe they can win the Big 12. I'm not ready to make any predictions on any conference right now, but talent roster-wise and what they have returning offensively, they get a pretty solid defense, which you should expect from a Dave Aranda coach team. Then they're going to have a chance to make some noise in the Big 12 and possibly make the college football playoff this year if everything goes as well as it possibly could. Their projected win total is actually the same as Auburn, though. They are projected to win 7.5 games this season. They have the 4th best odds to win the Big 12. The Big 12 very clumped together. No one is a massive favorite over anyone else because, again, the talent rosters are very similar throughout the league, so forth and so on. You may not care about all of that as a nerd about college football like I do, but just to give you some more info on Baylor, this is going to be a tough matchup for Auburn. I think this is going to be a really, really tough game. And when you look at this game, you talk about setting the tone for a season in week 1. I hate week 1 overreactions, but when you enter a year like Auburn's about to enter in year 3 under Hugh Freeze, when you've underperformed in your first 2 seasons, when you didn't make a bowl game last season, if Auburn drops this game in week 1, fair or not, if Auburn drops this game in week 1, Hugh Freeze's seat is going to get hot. People are arguing it's already hot entering the season, and that might be true, although I don't really buy that because, again, you haven't won or lost anything before a season kicks off. But if Auburn does lose this game to Baylor, fair or not, Hugh Freeze's seat is going to get very, very hot because this is a very, very important game for Auburn, but it's going to be a tough one. Baylor's a really good team, and to have to go to Baylor in week 1, when Baylor has a stud returning quarterback, you have a new quarterback, a lot of new faces. It's going to be tough. It is going to be tough. Right now, sitting here in May, again, we're still a long way away from August. In May, though, this game is going to be it's hard for me to feel confident if I'm Auburn in winning this game. Let's see how fall camp goes, and we'll see when we get there. But that is the preview of Baylor, and we'll keep that segment rolling on throughout the summer. Okay, let's keep going now with potential breakout candidates for Auburn football in 2025. Who are some players to watch who could break out and have big years? I could do a big list on this. I kept it at 4 guys, 2 on offense and 2 on defense. A couple of names I think are worth watching. First, we'll start with Amaris Williams. Amaris Williams nearly transferred. I believe he did enter the transfer portal, and Auburn was able to get him to return. This was huge. This guy was a former 5-star player in not this past year's recruiting cycle, but the year before that. He played in a few games last year, recorded 7 total tackles and a half of a sack. Man, the potential is through the roof. He backs up Keldrick Falk at defensive end. I think there's a possibility you could see both of these 2 guys on the field at the same time. If not that, I fully expect Amaris Williams to have a much bigger role in year 2. He said some things during spring practice that were eye-opening about how he had to change his work ethic a little bit and how he had to really mature. Look, that's fair. You should expect that from a freshman. You're not going to come in and necessarily be acting the way that you should in year 1. It's great that he realized that and he made the proper adjustments, and I think he has a really, really high ceiling. Really look forward to seeing him. Certainly one to watch to break out this season for Auburn on the defensive side. Along with him, Robert Woodyard. That name sounds familiar. It's because he's been here for a long time. He's entering his redshirt junior year, so this will be his 4th year at Auburn. Has 17 total tackles last season. Has never really been able to break through the rotation, but he hasn't transferred. He stayed at Auburn. He's continued to compete, and now he's going to have a chance to start next to Marcus Riddick at linebacker. This is a guy you want to see. These are the stories that you root for. It was like it was with, Eugene Asante, when he stuck around, was on scout team, and then ends up being a starter for Hugh Freeze in Auburn. Robert Woodyard is a similar story. A guy who has stuck around, who hasn't transferred, who loves Auburn, and now he's going to get an opportunity to start this year and be a really significant player. So he is someone to watch and someone I certainly will be rooting for. On the offensive side, Perry Thompson. I talked about him on 2 weeks ago, our last show we did before this one. I mentioned that Perry Thompson is probably battling for that wide receiver 4 position with Horatio Fields and Sam Turner and Bryce Kane and all those guys. But what if he breaks through? What if he is too good to keep off the field this year? That is a possibility, and it's another guy that I think Auburn fans are rooting for. He has a great story. His recruitment is well documented. His flip from Alabama to Auburn was a huge deal, huge tone setter for Hugh Freeze in this program, and Auburn is going to want to see Perry Thompson succeed. He has all the talent, has all the skill necessary to be successful. It didn't happen last year. That's okay. He was a true freshman. Not everyone is Cam Coleman, but Perry Thompson is very, very good and very talented, and he certainly could be one to break out this season for Auburn. Now, this one's a little odd, and I might get some pushback for putting him in a breakout candidate segment, But Damari Alston, I put him in there. I think it's fair. Look, he's been the backup running back now for a couple years. He's finally getting his chance to start. He had 276 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns last season. What if he's a 1,000-yard rusher this season? I'm not necessarily ready to predict that. I even have said as much on the show that I believe that Jeremiah Cobb might end up being running back 1. But what if I'm wrong about that? What if Damari Alston is running back 1 come week 1 and he stays in that position and he becomes a excellent tailback in the history of great Auburn running backs, including the last couple with Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter? That's certainly possible. Damari Alston is a talented running back. So we'll see. Maybe that's the case, and maybe he is better than I or maybe you expect this season. It's not out of the realm of possibility for Damari Alston, despite how I kind of envision this running back room shaking out, and I think it'll be a more by-committee approach. I could be completely wrong on that if Damari Alston ends up being a star for Auburn this season. Moving on now, sticking with the roster, what are some post-spring roster concerns that I have? The one I want to focus on today, we'll keep this segment going more than likely, but I just wanted to focus on one position room today, and that is the tight end room. If I were to pick an area of the roster that I'm most concerned about, I can name a couple, but the tight end room would probably be number 1. Auburn has Brandon Frazier slated to start at tight end. Remember, he is going to be playing his 7th year. He injured, I believe, his ACL last season, towards ACL. He's back. He's back healthy. He's a big receiver. He's going to be more of a receiving tight end this year for Auburn. He'll likely start. Preston Howard is also behind him as another receiving tight end. He transferred from Maryland. We got to see him a little bit at the spring game. You have Tate Johnson, who is a former offensive lineman, who is just a straight-up blocking tight end. Would not expect him to do any receiving. And then behind him, you have the 2 freshmen in Ryan Gia and Hollis Davidson. I don't expect either of those 2 guys to probably make a big impact this season, but they are worth mentioning. But the tight end room is thin, and quite frankly, it lacks talent in my eyes. You don't have a Rivaldo Fairweather. You don't have an excellent receiving tight end like he was. Brandon Frazier is serviceable as a receiving tight end. Maybe Preston Howard comes on. But if Auburn's tight end room is going to be better than I expect it to be, then one of those 2 things have to happen. Either Brandon Frazier has to be better than I expect, or Preston Howard has to be better than I expect. Blocking-wise, I'm not too concerned. Rivaldo Fairweather was not a great blocker. I do believe Brandon Frazier, Tate Johnson will be better at blocking than Rivaldo was. However, receiving is going to take a huge hit. Now, you can mitigate that by maybe running some four wide receiver sets. However Hugh Freeze and this coaching staff best decides to do that. But receiving is going to take a hit. I don't see how that stays level the way it was the last 2 seasons. That's okay, but you have to be better in other areas, especially at wide receiver, which Auburn has the talent to be. But I am concerned about the tight end room. I was hoping that and thinking that Auburn was going to be able to land a tight end in the spring portal. I think they tried to. No one, I think, really entered that they thought was good enough to really add something to this room, and so they stuck with what they had this year. I think they like Ryan Gia and Hollis Davidson and what they offer for the future. Just not sure those 2 guys will be ready to compete and to play this season for Auburn. So the tight end room is certainly a room I'm concerned about as we get closer to fall camp. Okay, let's get into our sports roundup now. It's been a busy couple of weeks now since we've last been on air for Auburn golf, for Auburn softball, for Auburn baseball. In golf, starting with that, Auburn won its regional, and didn't just win its regional. Auburn golf dominated the regional. They got hosted. They were the number 1 seed, played it at the Auburn Club here, of course, in Auburn, Alabama. And Auburn golf won the regional by 27 strokes. It was not even close. Just incredible dominance from this golf team. Jackson Coyven won the individual championship. What's new there? The best golfer in college golf. He's been phenomenal. And now Auburn golf will get ready to head out to California for the national championship. That will be held May 23rd through May 28th. Huge weekend coming up for Auburn golf. They won the national championship last year. They'll look to repeat out there in California, and they are more than capable of doing so. This is another fantastic team. I wish them the best of luck as they head out there at the end of this week. As for Auburn softball, the season finally came to an end, but man, what an impressive and resilient group this team was this year. Really, really enjoy watching this Auburn softball team. Their season ended in the Tallahassee Regional as Auburn fell to Florida State, but they did force the if-necessary game. They lost their first game in the Regional, ended up winning, I believe it was 3 straight, before eventually falling to Florida State in the final game of the Regional. So Florida State does advance, but this Auburn softball team, this was a rebuilding year. Chris and Kate Malvo, the co-head coaches, were in their first year at Auburn, and they made improvements, big-time improvements at the plate. Auburn was a much better hitting team than they were last season. Things fell off a little bit on the mound, but that was to be expected because Matty Penta, who was one of the best pitchers in Auburn softball history, graduated and moved on. So Auburn was expected to take a hit there. But, man, I am really confident in the direction of this program. I think Chris and Kate Malvo are exceptional coaches. I think if they continue to recruit and rebuild this roster, and that they are going to really get this Auburn softball program in a really good spot. And I'm confident in that, and I look forward to watching them in the years to come. So, it was, for a rebuilding season, I thought this was a job well done by Auburn softball this season. No, is finishing last in the SEC what you want? No, absolutely, and that shouldn't be the expectations moving forward. But for year one, to be able to make a regional, to be able to compete, and to be able to beat a lot of really good teams this season, I think it speaks highly of this program, speaks highly of Chris and Kate Malvo. As for Auburn baseball, man, what a ride it has been for Auburn baseball. The regular season is finished. Auburn did drop the series in Oxford to Ole Miss this weekend. They did avoid the sweep, which was really important because Auburn is trying to put themselves in a position to be a top 8 seed. If Auburn's a top 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, they will get to host both a regional and a super regional if they advance out of their region, which is, of course, having home field advantage is extremely, extremely important. So that's why at least getting one game against Ole Miss was important. Auburn did not have its best series, obviously, against the Rebels. Pitching really struggled. That is something I'm concerned about. That was 2 back-to-back rough outings for Sam Dutton, Auburn's ace. That is something that does concern me a little bit. We'll see if Auburn and Sam Dutton can shake out of that in the SEC tournament. That is what's coming up on Wednesday for Auburn. Auburn will play the winner of Texas A&M and Mississippi State on Wednesday night. Auburn's the 6th seed in the SEC tournament. They finished 6th. That will mean they finished 6th in the SEC regular season standings. So they'll play the winner of Texas A&M, Mississippi State on Wednesday night as they will compete to try to win the SEC tournament and then put their focus on the regional. They'll definitely host a regional, super regional, a little bit up in the air. Latest projections that I saw from Division I baseball had Auburn as the number 6 seed, which would be good enough to put them in a spot to host both a regional and super regional. So that's the biggest thing for Auburn to focus on. It would be nice to win a couple games in Hoover, though, in the SEC tournament. Certainly would help the resume even more. Auburn already has a fantastic resume. Number 1 strength of schedule, I believe number 2 in RPI. So the analytics really do love this Auburn baseball team. They finished with a 38-17 regular season record, 17-13 in the SEC. Both of those are the best since 2010. So how about Auburn baseball? I know you're judged by the postseason. I get that. But what a turnaround of a year it has been for Auburn baseball and Butch Thompson after last year was disappointing. It was a down year. It was a really bad year. Those happen sometimes. But Butch Thompson and his staff are incredible. Auburn baseball has incredible support. They turned around this roster and turned Auburn baseball into one of the best teams in the country. And now Auburn will have a chance to prove that over the coming weeks in postseason play. So I look forward to watching them continue to battle it out. Well, with that, we will wrap up today's show. I really, really appreciate you listening. And again, we're going to keep it going throughout this summer. We'll have plenty of content to get into. Again, there's always news revolving Auburn football, Auburn basketball. Again, by the time you're listening to the show, maybe there's already been news on the roster front for Auburn basketball, whether that's Tahaad Pettiford or an addition in the front court. We'll break it all down next week if we do get news on those 2 subjects this week. And there's always controversy surrounding Auburn football. So if you think there's not much to talk about in the summer, there is. There's still plenty to dive into, and we try to keep it interesting, and we'll try to keep it fun. But really, thank you so much for listening to Talkin' Tumors, and we'll be back with another edition next week. Thank you for listening to Talkin' Tumors. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe and follow @Talkin' Tumors on social media so you'll never miss an episode. War Eagle.